Hello and welcome to the FinTech Finance Virtual Arena. I'm your host, Doug Mackenzie, and on today's episode, we're going to be looking at fraud management in the cloud and also examining the changing role of a bank when it comes to banking as a service and all the different roles we're going to be seeing banks playing in the future. And joining me today, I have two very special guests who are right at the heart of that topic. So guys, thank you so much for joining us here today. If I could start with Marc, we've got Marc Trepanier from ACI Worldwide. How are you doing here today this morning, Marc?
Great, thanks for having me.
It's our pleasure. And can you give our audience who might not be a bit aware a bit of background to yourself and also ACI Worldwide, please?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm a principal fraud consultant. I've been working in fraud and financial crime for over 22 years now in Canada, the US, and now with ACI more internationally, supporting customers and in financial institutions and banks that use software to protect their organization.
It's absolutely incredible. I'm so excited to kind of hear that insight from obviously the North American perspective, but also that intersection between tech and finance. And also joining us, we have Sarah Armstrong-Smith from Microsoft. Sarah, how are you doing here today?
I'm very good, Doug, thank you. So just to introduce myself, so I'm Sarah Armstrong-Smith. I'm Chief Security Advisor at Microsoft. So I principally liaise with UK financial services, but also strategic and major customers across Europe. And I think that's from two perspectives, really. So one is regard their challenges with cloud adoption and digital transformation. But I think it's also fair to say, what is keeping them up at night with regards to cybercrime, financial crime, fraud, all the things that we're going to be talking about today.
So Sarah, with that in mind then, I'm going to get you to kick us off. And I think one thing that would be really interesting to hear is, we've obviously heard about the huge advancements in technology for customers, but then with those giant leaps and bounds, have there been equal advancements in fraud prevention for those customers?
Yeah, thanks, Doug. That's a really great question. And I think it's fair to say that fraud, financial crime, cybercrime is constantly evolving. When we think about the number of digital devices, the number of banking apps and services, and even the accessibility of online services and even the volume of digital transformation that we've seen over the last 12 months. And on top of that requirement to constantly innovate and provide services at scale. So the way that Microsoft has actually answered that question, if you like, is we're looking at how do we need to provide services for different sectors to address these services and these challenges. And in particular, we've recently launched the Cloud for Financial Services. And this is really about a number of factors. So one of the key factors, as we sort of talked about, is really about that getting that insight, those analytics, those really driving what's going on with regards to that financial crime prevention, that ability to analyze transactions, look for patterns of scale, but also how do they manage their risk? How do they manage their constantly evolving regulatory landscape? So I think all of those things combined is really kind of coming together in that kind of evolution, as we said, with regards to the transformation and also the services that are needed for banking in today's environment.
Yeah, it's almost a very unthankful journey, isn't it now, because of hearing that constant change on the regulation side, the technology side. I mean, poor financial institutions with that in mind. And so, Marc, I've also got to get your perspective as well from ACI. Do you see that it's kind of been this constant evolution, one moving forward, one maybe getting ahead? Do you agree with that?
Oh, entirely. And I've, being in the business over 20 years, the fraudsters and the banks and the payment providers play a game of cat and mouse forever. We're forever squishing down on the balloon, stopping fraud, and then it just pops up somewhere else. In terms of advancements, in terms of technology, there are really two things. Cloud is one of them, and I'll get to that in a minute. But the first one really is machine learning and AI. AI, machine learning has evolved greatly in the last 10 years. I think that, AI 2.0, things like federated machine learning are really poised to be the next great leap, I think, in terms of technology that's adopted in the payment space. And what does federated machine learning mean? Where am I going? It means really to solve this age-old problem of fraud sharing, right? Organizations can only keep growing so much horizontally and get more data and more data. eventually, being united together, we're stronger than individually, right? So how do we solve that age-old problem of fraud sharing? And I think federated machine learning is privacy by design. There's no sharing of any PII is the way to go. It's just fraud patterns and risks and formulas, and it really allows a rapid response across multiple attack vectors to stop fraud. I think that's one key technology. Also in the AI space, I think the other piece is our technologies like incremental learning, where the AI and the machine learning, the machines and the models have been built. You used to, back in the days, get a model refresh every year or every 6 months or whatnot. That's a thing of the past. The AI now learns from incoming data. So you just continuously feed it data, and it will actually self-adjust itself, knowing that there's more fraud here, there's less fraud here. The fraudsters have changed how they're committing their crimes, and it'll auto refresh itself, which is very cool technology. The robots are slowly learning to do everything by themselves.
Well, when it comes to fraud prevention, I'll allow that. That's a good thing.
Exactly. Yeah. And then the other part really is what Sarah was talking about. It's really about cloud. Cloud really is enabling a rapid acceleration and modernization of legacy fraud systems into these like super Uber, Netflix platforms, right, of the gig economy, to basically subscription service. That scale up and down from the smallest to the largest organization and have this true elasticity, right? Lots of people will go buy a server, they'll run fraud software on it and only ever use 10% of the server. The other 90% that they bought into is wasted. It just sits here as unused equipment, basically. So really having that true cloud native and elasticity, I think, is magical in the world of fraud, to be able to ramp up during the shopping season, then ramp back down when it's quiet. And really, I think it now allows payment providers to always have access to the latest and greatest technology in these super secure environments, right? At a level of investment that single-handedly any one of them would never be able to accomplish. So so large changes in the industry, in the landscape here.
Well, I think you've both kind of hinted upon the fact that not only, as you've just said there, Marc, there's been huge changes in the financial industry, but you've both, and Sarah, you included, if I come to you with this question, alluded to the fact that there's been a huge change in customer spending habits because of the pandemic, for instance, and also just general adoption to e-commerce and everything like that. So now we're seeing, and as an industry, do you think there's been an increase in fraudulent attempts over the past few months? And is that just because of the scale has increased, or is that just because there is now the time for fraudsters to make hay while the sun shines?
Well, you kind of hit the nail on the head there, Doug. So if I kind of think about the last 12, 18 months, I think the pandemic has a massive impact, not just on consumers, but changing business models, the whole environment. And there's probably three things that I would pick up on. So the first thing, as you sort of said, is just about the volume of online transactions. Now, we suddenly moved to digital and credit cards. We're not accepting cash anymore, so cash is the wrong thing. But that's really then the cyber criminals, as we said as well, have really taken advantage of the situation. With more people working from home, there's a real psychology behind the way they're acting and what they're doing. And they really follow the news of the day. And it's quite interesting. If I kind of roll the clock back in terms of what we've been seeing from a Microsoft perspective. So actually in April last year, so we may be a couple of months into the pandemic, the UK went into lockdown. There was a real fear factor for what was on the horizon about keeping services up, particularly digital services, because you're no longer able to go into your bank, going into town and all of these different things. So we're critically dependent on that digital environment, that digital infrastructure, keeping services online. But I think back to, in April in particular, we identified over 60,000 malicious messages related to COVID-19.
Wow.
So, so they're pretending to be the World Health Organization, they're pretending to be your bank, they're pretending to be HMRC, offering you lots of services and those types. So they're really taking advantage of the situation to try and get people to react, to go to phishing links, put in fake domains, all of these type of things. And that really introduced a fear factor. So you not only are you forced to go online to a certain extent, but you're also fearful of the transactions that you're doing online. And am I working in a safe environment and all of these type of things? But I think the third element really then is at exactly the same time, we've seen a huge increase in the insider threat as well. So as much as we're talking about the consumer fraud and those things that are going on from an external perspective, with people's working practices changing, and I think it's fair to say, if you're working in an investment bank, for example, you're probably were really locked down with regards to the type of data and the services that you had access to. But banks and also many different FSIs had to adopt their working practices at scale, and potentially that's introduced lots of stresses into the environment. So all of a sudden people have got access to data they wouldn't normally have access to, potentially talking about highly sensitive information through collaboration sites like Teams or Zoom or whatever the case may be. And there's a higher propensity, therefore, for that insider trading, data leakage, and all of those things combined. So actually, when we're talking about fraud, I think we have to think much broader than that kind of that external, that consumer fraud. It's also the insider fraud and all of these things combined. So actually, the risk factor and the way that we're thinking about, to what Marc was saying, those patterns of behavior, how can we utilize machine learning, the AI capabilities to kind of bring all of that learning together to see how we can tackle this evolving landscape, which unfortunately, as you said, Doug, is going to just continue to rise and continue to escalate.
Yeah. Now, with that in mind, then, it does seem to be that payments really are the kind of backbone of these fraud attempts. We're seeing phishing attempts. I got a couple that nearly got me just on kind of package delivery costs and everything like that over the course of the pandemic, and it always comes down to the payment. And Marc, you were bringing up PII and how important that is to kind of be protected, but still also use that data to leverage being protected. So with the rapid increase of the volume of payments also being at real time, I mean, like I said before, I'm almost feeling sorry for the banks. How can they keep up with this and the increased fraudulent attempts that we heard from Sarah?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll echo what Sarah was saying on the last question, really in line on the enterprise fraud risk and the rise of COVID. I think in the real-time space, machine learning is the answer. The humans by themselves can't take all those decisions in real time. You need a timely and contextualized decisions to be taken by the machine. So everything has to be pre-built. The humans, can only do so much. And the problem also with real-time payments is because of the scale and the increase in volume, you also need automation. So robotic process automation is key in delivering, clean operational or better operational efficiency at organizations as these real-time volumes and e-commerce volume transactions have grown throughout the pandemic. And the other piece to that, of course, is cloud. Cloud is definitely the answer. It's faster time to market. It's agility. It's the ability to modernize a multitude of new channels come online, right? Yeah. Somebody decides to launch a new QR code system in a country. You want to be the first one there. You want to benefit from that potential revenue growth from that new avenue. Some new online payment comes up. Okay, well, you want to be able to offer that too. You have to be able to pivot and add new channels where, in the last 25, 30 years, there was really only one or two channels that was pretty stable. Now we're at the crossroads where we're receiving suddenly all this demand for, 5, 10, 50 new channels all of a sudden, and it needs to be cross-border and international. So cloud really allows you to do that. Tighter fraud controls in a world of shrinking margins also, I think, is key. The last point there, really, real-time payments compared to card rails, the margins are not the same as they used to be. So out of the gate, you have to have machine learning in place and the ability to stop for transactions in real time. You have to have tight controls there because the margins aren't as large and crazy as they used to be.
Okay, so it's not typically all doom and gloom. It sounds like the banks can arm themselves with the technology to both be flexible and also create a bit of revenue when those revenue streams are starting to get a bit smaller. Now, I've got to ask then, just before I move on to the next question, Sarah, do you have any, I'd like to hear your thoughts as well on cloud being the answer to enable this flexibility, like Marc was saying.
Yeah, I think, Wally, I would just add to what Marc was saying with regards to that, the real-time analytics is so important, but it's not just having real-time information, it's what you do with that information as well, which is really key. So actually when you're presented with lots of information and all of this transactional data, and that volume is just growing exponentially, as we sort of said. So as much as we can look at this real time, you also have to have decision making real time as well. And that really means refining those policies in terms of, as Marc was saying, what can you automate? What do we deem as high risk, low risk, medium risk? And potentially, do we need to get the customer to re-authenticate? Do they need to call in? Do they need to have a PIN code or verification code? And we're seeing a lot more of this real-time transactions where you're literally in the middle of a transaction. It'll say, please go into your banking app or something like that and verify with a code. And that's real time, but it also means that from a customer experience as well, it also really helps with that. So they don't have to feel like the embarrassment, as we sort of said, is being online or being in the middle of a store and suddenly their transactions being stopped or something like that, and they're having to ring their bank. So it's it's having that information, what can we do with it? And the cloud really enables that analytics at scale and at volume, and I think that's really the key. But I think combined into that as well, what we're really seeing is the issues with regards to resilience. So when you have all of this data, all of these services changing, how can you innovate and provide services at scale? And I think that's one of the real values and benefits of having that cloud adoption, because it does enable you to do that. But also, if you're having to refine your products, I think one of the things that we talked about is not just the changing business environment and what's going on externally, but also the changing regulatory environment as well. So again, how can you adopt those regulatory requirements and that risk at scale at the same time? And that's again what's one of those benefits of that cloud adoption, as we sort of said.
Yeah. And I think that's going to be so critical going forward, as we're seeing, as you've both kind of been alluding to, it's a different role for a bank to play in this new organisation. It's much more customer focused. If it has to be, because soon with the prevalence of embedded finance, we can imagine some people don't even realize they're making a payment anymore. It's going to be quite exciting to see that changing nature. Now, that obviously leads to some institutions, some financial institutions, mid-sized banks in particular, kind of being in an interesting position. Not particularly too slow to change, but also don't maybe get the same tech talent as some of the fintech banks. And with that in mind then, if I can stick with you, Sarah, just to kick this one off, while the large traditional banks have a wealth of tech staff to pivot, how can the mid-sized banks actually keep up? And is banking as a service or software as a service going to be the kind of lifeblood effectively going forward for these banks?
I think the key really is all about innovation. And as you sort of said, arguably those firms, those fintechs, or the new challenger banks who were born in the cloud potentially had an advantage over some of the more traditional banking institutions. And that's just historical. It could be that the amount of technology, the tech debt, the processes, and those type of things. But I think it's actually fair to say that a lot of the traditional banking and those medium-sized organizations, as you sort of said, are starting to see the benefit of not just adopting cloud, but actually the reality is, as much as we talk about the benefit of cloud, they're going to be running hybrid. They've still got their on-premise world, they've got their cloud services and a myriad of cloud applications as well. And they've got to contend with all of those things together. So it's about getting oversight of all of those things. But the real benefit, I think, as we sort of said, it's the innovation, it's getting products to market quicker and smarter as well, in terms of the ability to add on a lot of these analytics and the AI, that machining capabilities we kind of talked about.
Perfect. And also, Marc, could I also get your perspective on that as well, please?
Yeah, it's interesting because, I talk with lots of customers in the industry, and, in the fraud space, software as a service in the cloud in the mid-sized organizations is absolutely the way to go. It's their ticket to survive this very aggressive change in the industry, and this modernization and this move to cloud. This is their way to grow their revenues and keep up with both the fintechs and the large organizations that have the capability to scale. I think mixing this elasticity with operational monthly subscription costs instead of these one-time large massive capital investments that they have to do, right, is a really big win for them. This gives them a foot in the door to be competitive and change their position in the market and make this competition interesting.
Yeah, and it's kind of what you're both alluding to is kind of what actually, Marc, you brought up earlier in the conversation is, you'd see some of these organizations or institutions buying a server and then only using 10% of it. And then that's not feasible when we've been just talking about the changing nature of payments, the changing nature of how a bank operates. And I think that's where the conversation should start heading. And with that in mind then, Sarah, with these increases from customer demands and when it comes to faster payments and also doing things digitally, while also being able to go into the branch whenever they want. How do you see the role of a bank changing?
I think fundamentally the role of the bank hasn't really changed. If we're thinking back over the last core decades about what is it you're there for in terms of providing services and financial information and transactions. So I think fundamentally the role of the banking institution is not changed in that degree, but we're going through an era of huge transformation. And I think it's fair to say even before the pandemic, there was already a mass acceleration to the cloud and adopting those type of services. But I think the pandemic has almost brought it to the forefront just how much the consumers are changing the business model. It's not the business themselves who are changing, it's the demands of the consumers and the way in which they want to consume services, the way in which they want to talk to their bankers. It's no longer, it's only 9 till 5, you have to go to the branch, this branch isn't open on a Sunday, that kind of thing.
Or half days on a Saturday.
Well, exactly that. So I think it's that kind of, we're in this sort of era where it's really about, and I want to be able to consume services, and it doesn't matter if it's banking services, it's retail, it's whatever it is, from any place at any time, potentially from any device. And it's like Marc was sort of saying, is we then have to think about all of those multiple different channels. It's not just about in-person or mobile phone, there's potentially multiple different factors all coming into play. And when you kind of look at this evolving environment where you've got people, employees and consumers potentially here, there and everywhere, logging on from multiple different devices, going into the branch, all of these kind of things, then we have to evolve our kind of mindset of risk and how much risk, and also the way that we're designing our technology and those type of things. So I actually think it's, as we sort of said at the time, it's not about the doom and gloom and everything's looking a bit murky. I think it's actually a tremendous opportunity to say what comes next. How can we kind of look at these things that are going on? Where's the opportunity for change? And I think it's fair to say that there's no going back. I think that door's shut now. So with all these kind of factors coming into play, it's really about where do we go next? And as I sort of said, I think there's a huge raft of opportunity to take advantage of there.
Well, Marc, Sarah's thrown down the gauntlet for posing an incredible question. Where can these organizations go next? And do you agree that effectively the role of a bank has effectively changed forever? The door is shut.
So I agree with Sarah. I think consumers are wanting more options, more flexibility. And the roles of the banks themselves fundamentally, haven't changed. They're still offering banking and providing you financial information and advice on what to do. The reality is that in the background, for years, these organizations have been growing these massive IT-centric teams. But with the introduction of cloud, I think that this changes the landscape, right? And offers them the possibility to be more nimble, to be more like fintechs, really, right? To be agile, to be quick, nimble, and to be able to pivot where and when needed. But consumer says, I want to be able to do a payment while standing in front of a window shop while I'm shopping by simply looking at something and pointing my device at it. That is a request for financial services. How do we get there, right? Financial providers need to be able to do that, whatever that request may be from the consumer.
That sounds like a really exciting future, but I imagine, with children, that would be a nightmare. But with that in mind then, Marc, if I could stick with you, obviously the large-scale financial institutions haven't been as quick to move as the typical fintechs, not just because of their size, but also because of their ability to remain compliant and the scrutiny they find there in the financial services industry. Now, we've talked a lot about cloud technology. We've talked about how it's going to enable them to pivot to new services and new products and new ways of thinking, but is it also going to enable them to ensure that while they do that, they remain compliant? Is there a compliance side to it that we haven't talked about yet?
Yeah, from a compliance perspective and the cybersecurity perspective, I think Microsoft Azure's ongoing, cybersecurity and compliance program, looking outwards, inwards to them, has a breadth and depth that I'm willing to bet no single organization can measure up to. To be fair, there's somebody who told me once in cybersecurity that the more you invest, the less returns you get on your investment. But you have to keep investing because it's cybersecurity and you don't want to get breached and you want to stay compliant. So you keep investing more money, but you go from, this one single solution helping you, maybe cover 40% of your risk to now this new solution improving your position by 1% or 2%. So the investment is a diminishing return. And if you look at the scale of investment done into cloud and the work that like Microsoft is doing in Azure, unless you're one of the largest organizations in the world, I don't think you can probably beat what they're doing in that space. So from a compliance perspective, cloud is definitely the way to go for even the smallest organizations, small to medium, even to mid-large organizations. I think that is the best way to go from a compliance and cybersecurity. Evidently, you're offsetting your risk to a third party, but that third party has this figured out way better than you ever will, in my opinion.
It's brilliant because it does show that what fintech is all about really is kind of opening up those individual sectors within a bank and then doing them really well and being able to plug in and play and create the best of service. I mean, Sarah, obviously Marc was glowing with praise there, and I've got to get your perspective as well and kind of hearing about the compliance side as well as the customer facing side.
Yeah, I think Marc teed me up quite nicely there, so thanks, Marc.
You're welcome.
So just to kind of reflect on what Marc was saying and just to kind of put that into perspective. So Microsoft has the biggest cloud platform against any other service provider. And with that comes a responsibility for compliance as well as security. But if I could sum it up, it would be around trust. And it's this trust from multiple different perspectives. So, if you're a banking institution and you're used to working in this on-premise, maybe lockdown environment, and you're thinking about moving to the cloud, no longer are you solely responsible for everything, that infrastructure and those services. It kind of parts of the shared responsibility model. So actually part of that infrastructure, the platform, the networks, is all down to the service provider, so Microsoft in this example. And they're always accountable for their data, and they're always accountable for what the people are doing with that data. But if you're going to have that trust, comes the compliance. So Microsoft also has the biggest compliance regime of any other service provider. I think we have nearly 90 different certifications, and some of those are sort of local certifications, some of those are global, but we are constantly discussing with different regulators. So there's going to be UK regulators, but regulators across different entities across the globe as well. So I think when we kind of look at, therefore, in terms of those trusted cloud principles, we look at it from security, compliance, but privacy. So that's not just in terms of privacy from a personal data perspective, but also privacy in terms of the data always belongs to the customer. It's always private to the customer and what they're doing with that. So that trust in that data is so important, but also the level of transparency as well. So we provide information through our trust center with regards to the type of certifications, the type of audit reports. Customers as well as consumers to a certain degree can go in and get kind of satisfaction with regards to those things, but that also goes into a big feedback loop into the platform, into the security and compliance capability that we actually provide. But we're also getting feedback from our customers about just what do they need, how are things evolving with regards to their ability to extract information with regards to that compliance, that regulatory reporting, and all of those things combined, really. So I think it's a sign of the times, but also if we then bring that from a consumer's perspective, as we sort of said, we're in a highly competitive environment. So if you've got the ability to go to multiple different banking services, lots of applications, lots of online services, why would I trust you in particular with my data? Where even is my data? Now, and I think that's one of the challenges when we're talking about cloud. And I think it's a real concern. And I think people are really kind of getting wise to this, and it's a really valid question that people should be thinking about, particularly with the volume of transactions and all of these things that are going on, and it's just in terms of, so that trust in data, the security, compliance that wraps around that is so critical when we're talking about cloud adoption and transformation and delivering banking services in this environment as well.
Well, I think you're so right. It's become such a competitive industry, and Marc, you were also saying, it's suddenly become a really fascinating one. It's really, it's going to be just absolutely brilliant. And I guess we've come to time, guys. But thank you so much for your insight. I think the best way to end it is to kind of hear from you guys about what you'll be working on next. And Marc, if I could throw the ball to you first, where can people find out more about ACI, and what do you guys got on the cards coming up soon?
Yeah, ACIWorldwide.com, and go check out our solutions in the fraud space, either banking, merchant acquiring, issuing, in that space, in that area of our website. And what I'm going to be working on is trying to build international machine learning federated communities across the world. We have hundreds of organizations that use our software to protect their companies. And currently working on connecting them together and create an international community to stop fraud. We are stronger together.
I think you're so right. I think we really are going to enter into a new era of bank communication, financial services communication, and hopefully that will be the ultimate in kind of not ending, but putting a dampener on fraud. I think that's absolutely brilliant. And also, Sarah, thank you for joining as well. Can you tell our audience a bit more about where they can potentially find out more about what you're working on too?
Yeah, I think I could probably sum it up as it's key to communication and collaboration. So I'm spending a huge raft of time talking to customers, partners, even regulators, just to understand this landscape of what's going on. But also what I'm doing is actually sharing these insights, not just within financial services, but across sectors and across multiple regions. So I think you can expect to see a lot more from Microsoft with regards to security, compliance, but also identity as well.
Incredible. Well, thank you, both of you, so much for your insights. It's such an exponentially changing sector, so it's been absolutely fascinating hearing from both of you. And also thank you to our viewers. You can catch the rest of the series and much more over at www.ffnews.com, and of course YouTube and LinkedIn, where I'll see you in the comments. So thank you very much, Sarah, Marc. It's been lovely having you, and goodbye.